Mr. Karthik is the one who is going to train you, and we are lucky to have him. And so yeah, and for registration, if you have any doubt, any question, feel free to ping me personally or any of our coordinator or in the group. Any question from any of you? If not, then another thing, our DevOps internship program will going to restart from next weekend, same time, and our AI and Python one is going to start from the next weekend. I think that is going to start Sunday morning CST or Sunday evening IST. So I am assuming no one has any question for me. So yes, Mr. Karthik. Let me start the recording first.
Yes, please.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. So today we'll be working on the 4th week topic, introduction to cloud computing, where we'll see how the cloud computing is different from the on-premises cloud computing. Okay. So before going further, right? So any questions that you guys are having from the previous sessions or anything, because as everything will be combined in cloud computing and we'll be adding some more content to that. So any questions in the previous part until now? Yeah, fine. So we have come to the fourth week, and we are talking about cloud security here. Cloud security is gaining very fast, and what are the things that we are having nowadays? Amount of services that can be provided related to cloud security is also higher nowadays, right? One of the major products sold by our appliances sold by cloud service providers are also security related products these days. Before we could understand what is cloud security and other things, right? We need to know what is cloud. Okay. So how many of you are using cloud on a daily basis? Any idea? Do you use cloud on an everyday basis? Are you a cloud client? Is my question.
I think we are using cloud in every step of our mobile and computer use.
Correct, exactly. Because if you're using Netflix, you're using cloud. If you're using Gmail, you're using cloud. And whatever we do nowadays are based on cloud itself, right? That is the main advantage of, and it is seamless. That's the main thing about cloud. So we don't understand what is the cloud basically is. Okay, so you might tell, okay, fine. What you're told is fine. So what is a cloud computing? We're using cloud computing every day. Everyone is using it, including your apps. Anyone who's using a mobile phone, everything is based on cloud. But what exactly it is? What exactly it is cloud? In simplest term, right? In simplest term, we can tell it as a cloud computing is nothing but a someone else's computer, right? That is, so what does it mean here, right? Example, we can take it up. Let's say I have a very powerful desktop PC and I can do a lot of, in terms of processing power, it's good. Like it might have 128 GB RAM, very good twin processor and things like that. So one of my friend will tell, see Karthik, I don't have any, I have an analytics job to do. And that particular takes a lot of CPU utilization. But I don't want to buy a new PC just for that because I just need it for an hour or so. And after that, I'm done with it. And no data need, I don't need more than that. So what I will do is that I will rent my desktop to him, right? And he is going to be using it and he is going to access my system via the internet, right? So if you see wherever you go, the internet is always represented using a cloud. The logo that is used for representing internet in any diagrams or anywhere, you see cloud is going to be used for that. And that is the reason cloud computing. So someone accessing a resource over the internet, it does not belong to them and using it. And after using it, they're going to stop it and they're going to be charged based on what they've used for. In a simple system, anyone can be a cloud provider, right? So that is in the simplest form, but one of the things that is not going to be there, right? So in an understanding verse, that is what is there. But in an enterprise level or an industry level, we need to have a much more clear definition for that. So cloud computing is a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources, right? That can be rapidly provisioned and released with the minimal management effort or service provider interaction. This is the official definition of cloud, and this is defined by NIST guidelines, right? NIST is the they gave because there's a lot of confusion when cloud computing came into existence and people started using cloud. There's a lot of definitions which were flying around, and they wanted a standard definition for that, and the NIST came into play. All right, so they came up with tell is that it's like any cloud computing is that there's a large pool of resources available in one location, and that particular location, it is going to distribute those resources. What are these resources? It is a networking resources, it is a server processing, the storage, and things like that, right? Your Dropbox is nothing but a storage services, right? That is all available on the cloud. Dropbox has their own cloud service, cloud infrastructure. From there, they're going to provide the services for you. And similarly for the application, your Gmail is nothing but a cloud-based application, right? Everything is going to be there. All those activities are going to be part of it, right? So dividing the services, distributing the services, and providing anyone who want access to the resources. Cloud has a very main advantage out there. Why did the cloud pick up so fast? Why so many people are using cloud? Is that the cost of introduction is very low. Let's assume there is a person who wants to start his own company and he wants to provide some kind of a service. So in a traditional approach, what he has to do is that once he has to hire an office, he has to rent out an office, then he has to he has to fill that office with the servers, he has to pay for the servers, then again he has to maintain those servers, and a lot of infrastructure costing is going to be very high for them. The introduction cost to starting up a business cost is going to be very high. And cloud, this takes this entire equation out of it, right? And at the same time, anyone can start it. They don't have to worry, and they're going to start. I think some people can start their their company basic services just by using their credit card and not spending more than few $100 every month for few, right? Based on that. So traditionally, one more problem was that when you're buying servers or infrastructure, you will always have to think about what is my maximum utilization is going to be, right? Let's say if I'm doing about 100 requests per day, but my maximum request goes up to 10,000 requests, but that does not happen every once in a while. It happens, it happens once in a while only, not quite often, but still I have to buy resources for that 10,000 requests only because the traditional infrastructures were not scalable, meaning I cannot increase the capacity when there is required and reduce the capacity when the requirement comes down. Right? That is the scalability is option is not. Cloud provides you with that kind of flexibility. Right? When you do the easy to instance or things like that, it could be running on a normal pace. And once there's the request, it can spin up additional resources for you and able to do all those things. So these are the advantages why people flocked into cloud, right? And they started pushing their data, they started storing their data, they started implementing new projects and things like that. And the impact of cloud computing was so high, and the cost of maintenance and things were so competitive. A lot of companies moved their on-prem services to cloud because they saw that they could save millions of dollars in some places, and it worked for them, right? But if you see nowadays, it is going down, the cloud computing, because the on-prem infrastructure cost is coming down significantly in terms of storage as well as the other things, and the cost of cloud computing is also going up. But still, it is not going to go anywhere. One of the main reasons is cloud security. And we'll talk about how cloud security is actually making people to stick around cloud security, cloud computing around, so rather than going on-prem. Right? What are the disadvantages having an on-prem services when it comes to security, and how cloud provides those kind of protection against that, right? So we'll go with that. So start off with, before we could do, but there are certain things we need to understand, right? So for us, security is always about defense in depth. For us to go much more depth into anything, we need to understand the underlying technology, understand it, process much more detailed, right? So you can see there's a lot of cloud characteristics, right? So one of the essential characteristics are it is on demand and self-service. So meaning whenever I want to spin up an instance, virtual server, I can spin it up myself without having to interact with anyone on the system on the cloud provide services. All of my services are going to be measured and I'm going to be charged based on that. So I'm not going to pay more than what is not there, right? Only I'm going to pay only for the process that are going to be used by me. And rapid elasticity, meaning it is rapidly scalable. I can go from one server to 20 server or 100 server with a short span of time and scale back to that one server with a short span of time. So making sure that is going to be used only for a certain amount of time. I think one of the early stages we can tell is that there was an attack that could happen. Very large log file was there in terms of cybersecurity. I'm talking. This is true in a lot of other cases. They saw that the cost of analyzing that log was going to be in terms of duration. It was about 40 days. And again, it is going to be very expensive for them, right? When they're not using if they're using the on-prem services or things like that. But this is in the early stages of cloud computing. Someone decided to use an AWS service for that, and they were able to do the entire analytic process within 40 minutes and significantly reduce the cost. The cost was so less. I think the chief operating officer paid using his credit card at that time. But it was not the same case. I think if it was few $100,000 at that time, if they had to go the traditional approach to go with that. That's the thing. And broad network access, it can be accessed from anywhere, another process and everything. And resource pooling. So what do you mean by resource pooling? So yeah, if you see in your carpooling process, what happens is that there's one car and everyone is going to access. So there are multiple people using that car to travel out there. In a similar way, in a resource pooling, there'll be one large very powerful computer that can be used, and it can be divided into 4 people. It is similar to running your virtual machines in your laptop. Just the difference is that you are running a single laptop. A large cloud infrastructure will probably run thousands or probably even a million devices out there for the similar situation. That's the main process. Okay. That's the main characteristics of a cloud. But typically they can talk about in the service model are SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, right? So software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Software meaning you're only going to be accessing a particular software in the cloud, and platform as service, they're going to give a platform to you, right? There's an operating system and things like that which you can manage. And infrastructure as a service, you're going to be much more detailed approach, much more hands-on to that, much more physical access to that, right? So if I ask you, let's say when you log into the AWS service and you launch an EC2 instance, is it in a SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS? Which is that? So which is that it is going to be available out there?
Yes.
SaaS. Okay. Anyone else? Predominantly, it is going to be platform as a service. Software as a service, for example, it is going to be something like a Dropbox, Google Drive, or it could be Gmail services or any of the things that are there. So what is happening here is that you don't have control about anything out there. So simple way of looking about here is that, one second, let me explain. If you have to think about what are the things that is needed to run a web application, right? Let's say there's a web application is needed by you. What are the things that is going to be there, right? For that, I need a physical server, right? I will need a physical server. Then there's going to be an OS that is going to be part of it, right? Then I will need the software for that meet inside the OS. Then I will need the code out there. Then I will get the user interface, right? I'll get the user interface out there for that. So in SaaS, you're going to be given only access to the user interface, right? Typically, you can take up what is Microsoft Teams and other things, right? Where SharePoint and other things, where you don't have access to the server or anything. What you're going to have access to that is that you're going to be given only, you can create users for your employees in that, and you can give up, you can manage, it is a user interface is going to be there, right? A web page where I'm making all the changes. I'm creating a user, I'm giving him a folder and things like that. There is no, you don't have access to any of the software or the code or the operating system. None of them you don't have access to. You don't know what is the background services running at all out there. So in those cases, it is called as a software as a service. Meaning there's a very little input requirement from your end, and it is going to be very. So understand this concept of that. Let's say you're a small company, you're not a technical person, but you're starting a part of a service out there, and you don't want to hire any kind of technical people, more people out there, because technical people or technical employees are a bit more on the expensive side. It is going to cost you, right? So that can be mitigated here, right? Someone, if you are having on-prem services, on-prem server, you need to hire someone to do these activities for you. So that's the main disadvantage of that, and that is overcome using SaaS, right? Whereas the PaaS, platform as a service, is bit more available out there. Here we can tell is that you have much more greater access to that, but not a complete access to things, right? So whereas here you will know what operating system you're running, what is the software you're running, what is the code you're running. If people have you set up an EC2 instance, I can tell I want to run an Ubuntu operating system, and I can tell that this is the inside the Ubuntu operating system. These are the software that need to be done, and I can make configurations for that. So that comes in your PaaS. Right? On a normal day basis, amount on a technical source, companies which are working on a much more technical, deeper into that, predominantly will work in PaaS as a platform as a service, because they do have much more control over what they're tapping out there. Infrastructure as a service basically deals about the physical part of it as well, right? So in a platform as a service, there will be a server where you're given a part of that one VM is going to be your part. Your VM1 is going to be, VM2 may belongs to someone else out there. That someone else is going to be there. Whereas an infrastructure level, that server is going to be belonging to you. No one else will have access to that. You are much more control. You are going to decide what processor you're going to run, what is the RAM you're going to run, and much more detailed process for that, on the networking level and things like that. It is much more detailed. For this is basically done for a huge clients, uh, larger clients who want to have much more detailed process for that. So they will have a set number of servers that is set for them, right? For instance, one example is I was doing in cloud auditing for one of the largest banks in India once, and there the point there was we went to a very large cloud farm out there, and it was a very high security, right? So a week in advance, I had to submit my government ID proof telling that who I am, and I needed to submit my serial numbers for my mobile and my laptop, what tools are going to be inside the laptop and everything. So I had to take my official laptop, completely clean it, do a fresh install, only install relevant software and things like that. Because once I go there, there's a huge, it will not know the security is such that I had been going around that building. I'd been going around that building for more than a decade. I never knew that was a cloud data center out there. You'll never know about that. So there is no window or anything. I thought it's some kind of a storage facility. So when I went inside for that. So for that, in a particular floor, a particular section is completely quarantined off. That has been set aside for that particular bank provider, right? It is the client for that service, and they are set up for that. And that service is going to be monitored by them, right? They're going to give an engineer who is going to work for them, right? And is going to work based on that for that. So infrastructure, meaning you have much more detailed access to that. You are much more detailed to the infrastructure, the physical devices, things like that. That is the main thing about infrastructure. But predominantly, most of us will working on a platform as a service, platform as a service out there. In an, so that is the service models that is going to be there. Service models will play a major role in cybersecurity in the cloud environment, right? It is going to be deciding who is responsible for that and things like that. We're going to learn about it next. But what are the deployment models? So how is the cloud deployed and what are the different ways to go about that, right? So there are different things. One is public cloud, one is private cloud, and is hybrid and community. Public cloud here, AWS is nothing but a public cloud. So meaning is that in a single resource, it is that particular resource is available to everyone. There is no dedication to that, meaning there's a single server. I can give one resource to one client, and the second resource is given to the client two out there. So meaning everyone will have access to this particular resource. That's the thing. Whereas in a private cloud, typically what happens here is that, as I told earlier, a banking, they had a separate section for them and they're going to be given access to that. In some large cases, there will be entire server farms designed and configured and given to the client, right? The way we are going to manage a large cloud farm where thousands or even millions of devices are there, it is going to be difficult out there. For instance, let's say Cisco have a very big, large private cloud. So meaning that is been given to them, right? It has been maintained by Cisco, but the infrastructure and setting up the devices, setting up the networking, setting up the routers and everything is going to be given by the provider, but managing it is going to be taken care by Cisco, right? Or they're going to pay for the management of the entire thing, and they're not going to share. They're not going to share that infrastructure with anyone else. So that is a private cloud. And hybrid cloud here can vary depends on it, right? So that is going to be a bit different. So some people will tell public and private, right? So it also means on premises, on-prem and private, or on-prem and public. So meaning, let's say I've got in a private, I've got about 1,000 VMs, there are 1,000 servers are there for my utilization in a private cloud, but that is not enough. But adding to a private cloud is going to be very costly affair because it is not cheap, because you're having a dedicated resources, everything for yourself. The cost is per unit is going to be high. And you are going to be needing only one or two more units of the. In those times, you will have those machines set up in a public environment, right? The low hanging or things like that, low hanging important data can be kept in a public cloud where it is going to cost less, right? That is one situation for an hybrid cloud. Another situation is on premises, right? People are already have on their network. There's a server available out there, right? And via the cloud, they will have one more server, right? So meaning, let's say they're having some internal data on the private server and they're having some external data on the cloud. So this is basically about hybrid, meaning you're not sticking to one deployment model. You're having multiple deployments model in those situations, right? That is basically the process out here. Community, we don't see community deployment model quite often. And basically, it is a very low end, usually what we have seen. It does not occur that quite often as well. And the number of users is also going to be very limited. So here, let's say community is like telling a set of people, a large set of people who belong to a similar ideology coming together and setting it up for themselves, right? Only the people in that community will be able to use that particular process, or no one else will be able to. For instance, let's say you can tell Kubernetes is a community, right? And the Kubernetes might have multiple projects that is been designing for, they are using for experimentation purpose before it can be launched and things like that. And that need to be experiment, right? So how do you experiment all those things? You will need to have a cloud infrastructure where you can experiment all those things. That kind of a situation where a particular cloud infrastructure is only available for a particular community, right? No one else is supposed to use it. At that time, it will be called as a community cloud. And we don't see that quite often, right? We don't see that quite often, very rarely, but still it is used some places. Okay. So now these are the things. So what are the two main characteristics, two main actors in a cloud computing? One is the user. Second one is the cloud provider. In this case, it will be your AWS, GCP, or Azure, or someone. There's so many cloud providers out there that is going to be there. If you see, whenever we're doing on-prem services, right? So what we saw last 3 weeks, we talked mostly predominantly we're talking about on-prem services, and who is responsible for providing security out there? It is the user itself. The user itself is responsible for providing the security. In a cloud environment, who is responsible? So it is a question for you guys as well. Who do you think is responsible for your security or securing your data, communication, and everything? Who is responsible for that in a cloud environment? Any answers? There's nothing being wrong with in this situation, because it's always the more you approach and more you try to solve things, it's going to make it much more easier for you to in the future. Right? Who is responsible for that? If you remember, we spoke about deployment models just a couple of slides back here, and the service models. Service models decide who is responsible for what, right? So the more it is I'm having access, the more the user is having access, right? So for this, in the user infrastructure as a service, right? The user is having access to the servers, the meaning physical, right? Physical and things like that. In a software as having is least access is the access to resource. In this case, when the client is having more access, right? When the client is having more access, it will be the client's responsibility or the user responsibility to provide the access. When he loses that access, it is the responsibility of the cloud provider to give this kind of an access of that, right? One of the reasons, one of the compliance requirements, right? One of the ISO 27K, right? Compliance that is needed by organization to tell that they are running a safe shop, right? Safe web application, how the software is safe, is that they need to encrypt the code, and the code management, who is having access to that, is very much important out there. I'll tell you the example here, how the providing the service is going to be there. We had a code in a similar way, right? So they came and they have a huge list. They're asking what kind of an encryption standard you're using for encrypting the code. If you're having the data, what kind of a data encryption you're using? What are the other things? There's a huge list that comes into play for us. So luckily, we were not storing the data on-prem. So I don't have to do any of it, but I was storing the data on an AWS service, right? Now they do ISO 27 will have a tie-up with the AWS where they will have a clear-cut instructions of what is the security. Because now, since the data is stored and the code, everything is stored, and management of the everything is going to be done by the AWS, I don't have to provide any of that. From a compliance perspective, there's one less thing to worry about from my end of that, right? So that is the thing. So if I was running on-prem services, I was managing the server physically myself, my responsibility will be much higher. If I'm putting it on the cloud, and the less access I have, it's going to be less important for me. So we'll see. Well, let's have a much more detailed understanding of what I mean, right? If you take anything, if there is an on-prem service, everything is going to be consumer's responsibility. The cloud consumer is responsible for everything. And you can see that network control and physical security and things like that, the cloud provider is going to be more responsible when you're dealing with SaaS or PaaS out there, right? So what are you talking about here? Data classification and accountability, meaning what is data is more important, what is less important, who is having access to that, did they delete the data or anything like that, is going to be part of it, right? And the endpoint protection. So is this firewall is present out there or not? Who is able to access that endpoints? Who's able to access the server? What modification can be done by him? And all those things are going to be taken into consideration out there. And identity and access management, right? Who is responsible? What is the user? What is his role? What resource he has access to? That is there. And application and network controls, what we talk about is generally what we have done. So what is the application? What are the configuration changes I can do? What software I can install? All those things comes into play. Host infrastructure and physical security, right? Host infrastructure is a server that is available out there. Physical security is actually the, what we can tell, the complete campus access to the physical security that is going to be there. If you look at any Google Cloud Platform campuses or AWS, it will be very huge, right? And probably in hundreds of acres of land is going to be used for that. And the security there will be top notch. Probably it will rival any of the US bases, military bases. The security will be, and probably some of the US bases may not be as heavily fortified as a survey cloud. Top cloud providers have physical security is going to, and everything is going to be monitored out there. And here you can see there is infrastructure as a service, the more responsibility belongs to the user, right? Only when it comes to host and infrastructure and things like that, it will be more responsible for the cloud. There is a division of process for that. And cloud provider is going to be completely responsible for the physical security, right? Whereas in PaaS and SaaS, right, is SaaS, you can see the only the data classification and accountability, right? We Because when we have a service, it is the responsibility of the cloud's user to tell which user is having access to what data, right? I will use, let's say I have an database for a college database where we're entering student information and everything. It is the responsibility of the college who's managing, who's using that software to tell which teacher will have access to which student's data, because cloud provider cannot give that information, take the decision out there and things like that, right? There's also something you can see out there. There's something called as a FaaS as well, functionality as a service. That is nothing but your, serverless approach where you're running an application. You're not actually configuring the server, you're just running the code out there, and that cloud provider will take. But that is one of the places, but it is having a very less impact these days. People are moving away from server, but it has a similar impact, right? In everywhere, the cloud provided the least you have access to the resources, the cloud provider is going to be more involved, is more responsible for it. And this is a very good approach, right, for small companies, right? Because they don't have to. Getting in compliance certification is very important for small companies because it shows that they have a very good posture and it will help them sell their business. Because having a compliance, security compliance will also add to the business competitiveness, right? Let's say you have a two cars are there. One brand is telling it is crash tested and this is a certificate for that, for crash test, and it is a safe car, right? NCAP, global NCAP is going to tell it is a safe car that is there. But let's say there's another car which is much more stronger and much more safer, but it does not have a certificate. Right. So people cannot measure their how safe that other car is, even though it is secure than the first one which has the certificate, but they can't measure it because it's not been tested. So at that time they'll go with the car that comes with the certificate. Similarly, an organization which has an ISO 27K or HIPAA certifications, people will do more likely to do business and it will give an competitive edge. But getting these compliance certificates are very difficult. It's very stringent. It is one of the most difficult situations to go to because the auditors keep on asking different variations and things like that. It becomes so difficult. Why security job openings are a bit more difficult is that they need, in certain cases, there needs to be done a background verification check in cybersecurity, right? You can't. There are cases where they'll check for criminal, they'll check whether this person's having criminal record or not. In certain high critical job opportunities where security is, where the data is very stringent or very critical, they'll not only do your background check, they'll also probably will do your family background check as well, or probably a second tier family background check as well, checking whether your mom's uncle is in any or sister is in any kind of anything, criminal offense or even that time it is going to have an issue with that. So, so that kind of a stringent compliance is going to be there for small companies when cloud provider comes in and provide these security features. Lot of weight shifted of that shoulder for them, and it will help them the compliance getting into that. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of companies, not only from an infrastructure perspective, a lot of companies continue to maintain is that the security is, they don't have to worry about security too much. They have to worry, but they have to, it is a reduced amount, right? So what are the ways? What are the important topics? What we see? How do we go about that? Right. One of the things that you will see most common is security groups, right? So what is a security group and what things are going to happen with them? If you remember, we spoke about firewall in one of the earlier webinar topics. Security groups just that out there, right? And what are the things that we control in the firewall? We can control who can access, what resource they can access, what is the port number they can access, and what time they can access, right? All those things can be determined out there. Security groups, it is what it's going to do. It is going to monitor your all incoming and outgoing traffics, right, and control it out there, right? So it also processes a whitelist, but you can in cybersecurity you have to think a blacklisting and whitelisting. They'll always prefer a whitelisting approach. So, for instance, what do you mean by blacklisting? So blacklisting basically tells that a particular, let's say, I'm telling, let's say a particular, let's say, let me explain probably. Yeah. So let's say there's a server and I've identified there's one system that is able, it is checking and constantly, I'm a bit doubtful of this, and let this IP address be 10.10.10. What I will do is that I'll blacklist this IP, right? And the firewall is going to receive this packet from here, is going to drop that packet because that is a suspicious IP and I'm going to blacklist it. So now what hacker is that is going to be very clever. What is going to do is going to change his IP to something else. And this is what happens nowadays, right? The hackers will always spin up a new virtual machine or a new VPC from your cloud and start doing the attacks again. So now when the packet comes in here, even though the production is there for 10.10.10, 11.11 is a new machine, then it is going to allow the attack is going to continue, right? This is the drawback using a blacklisting. Here, what they're going to use whitelisting. So blacklisting meaning block a particular IP, allow all except this particular IP. In a whitelisting, it is the other way around. Allow a particular IP and block all, right? So meaning, let's say there is an admin is accessing this particular machine from 12.12.12.12. So I'll go to write a firewall. I have a whitelist, meaning allow only this one, block everyone else. So irrespective of whatever the IP address this hacker comes into play, it might use 9.9.9.9, 15.15.15.15 or anything, he will be no longer be able to access it. And that is what the security groups are going to be taken into consideration for, right? It will take care the controlling the traffic. So meaning here we're talking about in a cloud environment, right? So you might have a server, we can use that security group to tell what users can access what kind of a services on what port, right? Anyone can access that particular EC2 instance on port 443 for viewing the web page. But if you want to connect to SSH, only particular port is going to be accessed and only from a particular user. And that we can monitor as well. Right. That is the security group out there. But this is very much important, right? Wherever we go, we talk about security groups and things like that. And this is one of the fine tier approaches to your system out there, right? So one of the main things. But there are a lot of other things, right? Other things that are needed out there. So anyone of you have configured any security group in your EC2 instance? Have you okay. So what were you allowing and what were you not allowing out there?
Like the inbound, there was inbound rules and outbound rules. So allowing HTTP, SSH, HTTPS.
Exactly, right. Most of the time, what I'm going to do is whenever we are helping out with the classes and other things where we are dealing is that I would usually give allow all for that because it's make things much more easier for the training purposes. But I always tell it is for training purposes and you should, since it isn't, it's not any competitive data or any confidential data is that can be used out there. But when dealing in real time, you have to be very careful, right? And what is the proof that the security group configuration you have done is right or wrong, right? What is the guarantee for that? So we'll talk about that in the later slide. So let's see what are the different components that are there. Just a second. Just a minute. One of the main components that is going to be of critical importance in a cloud environment, right? What makes, which is not present predominantly in an on-prem service, is that the management plane, right? For instance, when you log into an EC2 instance, you will get a dashboard, right? And where you can, this dashboard is going to deal about, right, what you can access. You want to create EC2 instance or S3 bucket or anything that you are going to do, that is going to be process possible out there. And this is called as the management plane, right? Where you are managing your infrastructure from the process. So securing that management is very important, right? Here we're not talking about the infrastructure, underlying resource pool. We're not talking about that. We're talking about access to the management, isn't where you can manage this, whatever the resource that has been given access to it. Compromising a management plane is like compromising a complete infrastructure, meaning I am hacking into a website where network and company's network and completely compromising that network. It is as equivalent to that if I can gain access to a management plane and I can create all those things for them. Right. So how do I? So these are the main things. But how do you provide security? How do you provide security in this kind of a situation? Right. So one of the main things is that the most of the time the interaction from a management plane to the resources that is going to go through in your web console and API require gateway, we have to make sure there's a very good security requirement out there, making sure no one has access to the management plane. The people who are having access to the management planes should be more continuously monitored and use a stronger authentication mechanism, right? One of the ways of having a stronger authentication mechanism is to have a very large, long password. Going with an 8-character long password may not be a sufficient idea out there, right? Going with a very long password is very critical. One more way of going about is having a multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication makes sure that even if your username and password is compromised, the hacker will not be able to gain access or break the authentication. So they will need to have one more feature into that part, right? One more process is segregation of duties, right? What do you mean by segregation of duties? Here, based on the user role, there is a separate user ID is created or a separate role is created out there. Whenever we are doing some kind of pen testing acts out there, we usually ask what are the different types of users out there. So usually they talk about there's an admin user, there's a super admin user as well, all right? And there's going to be other parts of semi super admin and things like that. The difference here is that all of them are managing some kind of thing, they are configuring something, but a super admin have a full access to everything, right? Complete access will be there, all the resources, whereas admin will have access to a certain set of things only. Let's say it is virtually I'm managing about 10 instances out here, right? And an admin will be able to access one of the instances and manage it only, but he'll not be able to do anything about the other resources. Whereas super admin will have complete access to all the resources. Right? So this is a very good idea because let's say there are 3 admin people out there, John and someone out there, giving them access to everything means it is going to be an issue, right? An admin giving only for a particular meaning, like even though this one admin ID is compromised, only one particular resource is going to be compromised, right? And that is going to be done out there. And these admin users or management consoles, for a good posture, security posture, it is very important that you log them, log their activities significantly. Any action performed by them on the device or on the instances are always monitored, right? Even the commands that are running out, run by them. Okay. So one is the management plane. The one second thing is the infrastructure security, right? Infrastructure security is, we can talk about as a physical, but also from a server perspective. What are the different things that are available out there, right? Main thing that comes into information security is configuration, things that can be done, and how do you go about that, right? So networks and things. There are multiple places where an infrastructure security could go wrong. One of the places is network access. So let's say there's a server who is having access to that services server that makes a network access related process for that. What are the ports that are open out there? What are the other security features that can be provided to make sure for that? And one of the main issues also is configuration management. One of the things that is very critical is configuration, right? Even after providing one of the best security services, having a security configuration, misconfiguration is having a huge impact, right? So one thing we can do for recommendation is setting up a firewall for your infrastructure and having a rule set in your cloud telling that deny all, right? Have a whitelist, only allow a certain process and block everyone else. Make sure that your remote access to the servers are limited or disabled completely. In some cases where we can configure a firewall, make sure that your resource or your server can only be accessed from a particular IP with a particular MAC address itself, meaning even that administrator changes the IP address, connects to a different network and connects from that, he will not be able to do that. Meaning he will have to sit down in his office and from that particular system that is assigned to them on that particular network, only then you'll be able to make changes to the server and connect to the server. Right? Always check out, right? If there is any important file is there, if the integrity is compromised, always look out for that, right? You remember the hashing algorithm we went through, that is going to be done out there. Again, one more thing you have to think here is that, let's say there's a vulnerability, right? So how do you create an image in and how do you create a VM in an AWS? You will take an image and you will create a virtual machine out of it, right? Where it is already existing image of that. We're going to take that and we're going to create one. Let's say I got a Ubuntu machine, a virtual machine that is running in my cloud instance, and now all of a sudden there's a vulnerability in Ubuntu that Ubuntu sends us a patch out there. So am I going to run the security scan on my server which is running? Yes, I'm going to run. And am I going to patch it? Yes, I'm going to patch it as well. But patching the already existing server is not sufficient. We have to patch the server image as well, meaning we have a copy of an VM where I'm copying, using that copy, I'm making multiple instances. Even that image should be patched out there. Because when I patch the virtual machine, virtual instance that is running, only that instance is secure. I might create one more new instance down the line at that time that if the image is not patched, even that is going to be having an issue with that. Right? Always store logs, but never store logs on the same network. Right? Why is that? Because if your infrastructure is compromised, if you store the logs on the same network, the hacker is just going to access your log files and delete all his tracks. So that is not going to be there. And again, different subnets, different devices, how they are going to communicate. It has to be properly monitored. We have seen that in our one of the tests that we do, right, for PCI DSS is that they will have one that the client had a website. It was a ticket booking website for a particular community, right? It was for a particular community for, I think, people. It was for veterans, right? So they had some kind of a discount process going on for that. So in the cloud environment, they had a testing server where the code was used, and there was a production server where the production server is nothing but a public server. So our point, the point there was very simple. This was running on 10.10.10.10, and this was running on 11.11.11.11. So I have to log into this, open the command prompt, and run a ping command 11.11.11.11, and it should not allow that. It should not be reachable from that. And the same thing process for that. So I will do a ping command, and it will show a host not reachable. Take a screenshot, put it in the report, host not reachable, and the segregation of subnets have been done successfully. That's the report for that. Because the main reason is that if one of your server gets hacked, it does not make sure that hacker using that server gain access to the other servers also. To prevent this kind of an approach is done out there, right? If you are seeing now, one of the things that you'll see common here is that what are the things that we are doing in on-prem service or any other place, it is the same thing is being done on the cloud environment as well, right? It is going to be the same thing that is done on cloud environment as well, but there's a small variation for that, right? Who is doing that process is different, and how it process is going to be different, because cloud environment also adds the costing factor to that. The more we are going to do certain things, the more it is going to be expensive for us, right? And other things as well. But it is the same pattern, and encryption of data is similar to that. Yeah. So encryption of data or securing a data in motion and in at rest is meaning when the data is moving from one system to another system. It may be from server to the client, meaning your browser, or browser to the server. It is a data in motion. And when your data is stored in a database server, and that is a data at rest, right? So both the places, the encryption should play a very important role. And one of the main advantages of using a cloud provider for your data in rest and data in transit is that they use the latest algorithms for doing this, and also the way they do this process with the seamless approach, right? Where you, from a compliance perspective, you will have to look at things. Okay, fine. What is the encryption algorithm I have to use? What is not, you should not be used? What algorithm should not be used? All those things you will have to do a lot more research and work into that. But in here, that is not going to be an issue. The cloud provider is going to be taken into that process as well. Either this approach can either be provided by the cloud provider, or third-party tools are also available out there, right? There are a lot of, for instance, AWS itself will provide a firewall, right? But I can also have a checkpoint cloud-based firewall, or a Palo Alto cloud-based firewalls can also be done. Those are third party. Similarly, in an encryption process, that it is going to be there as well. The AWS also will provide encryption, services for that. But if you are not interested, we can go with the third-party services as well, right? But we should always look for products that work seamlessly, and where it can be done without too much interaction, too much actions need to be taken by the end user, right? The more user you're going to be involved, the more complex it is going to be done. And the more complex, meaning more chances of an error, and more chances of an error leads to an increased in attack vector or compromising method. So have you guys, anyone of you guys use encryption on a day-to-day basis? Do you encrypt your data? Right. While in, I think in transit, all of you are going to use, right? Whenever you're accessing a website, if you're using HTTPS, your data is getting encrypted before being transmitted. But what about storing your data, right? Are you encrypting your mobile phone? Your data is going to be encrypted in your mobile phone. Are you storing your hard drive in your laptop? Anyone? So how many of you are using your iPhones and MacBook or ThinkPad?
Yeah,
Right.
storing data in not sometimes in E drive or C drive, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, the
Uh,
Windows, I think it does provide some kind of an encryption support, but it is not adequate. But if you're using your iPhone, MacBook, or ThinkPad, all the data, all the data is encrypted by default, right?
yeah, so storing the data in desktop in MacBook, but
Yes,
is
yeah,
that encrypted?
yes, yes. The main reason is that why, one of the reasons why your Android phones, right? Why the Android phone? I also use an Android phone. Why it is cheap and why iPhone, the cost of manufacturing for Apple itself will be expensive is that they will have a dedicated chip inside everything and where it is going to encrypt the data. Meaning the hard drive in your iPhone is data, even if someone captures that hard drive or the chip that stores the data, they will not be able to see what's the data inside that because there's a chip that is going to be managed out there and they continuously keep on changing that. It is not that iPhone is 100% secure, it is still hackable, but it is more difficult when compared to Android, right? Because Android you will get a lot of the higher end Android phones will have a dedicated chip. For instance, like your Samsung Galaxy Flip or anything other than higher end, they will have a dedicated chip for that. But your lower end, right? Something you're getting for $100 or something very at the lower end, it's not going to have any kind of an encryption. So someone takes your phone and removes your hard drive chip out there and connects it to another phone, they'll be able to see the data inside there. Similarly, right? So what happens in a cloud environment, why data encryption is important is that, let's say in a cloud data storage, this is there, and one part of your data is given to you, right? Another part of the data is given to the other people. Let's say this person has not done the security properly and this gets hacked. In past, there has been cases where after this, even though you're not on the same network or same company or anything, after hacker getting to the one of the instances resources is able to gain access the resources from the other company. That is the problem with the public cloud, right? You're sharing the resources, your hard drive is shared, right? If you're having a 2 TB hard drive, 1 TB is given to company A and second terabyte is given to company B. If company A data gets hacked, there are cases that is the hackers are able to jump onto the company 2 database as well and steal that data as well. But if you have encrypted this data that is present out here, even though this data gets stolen, it cannot be read out there. So you're having one more level of security out there, right? And also very important in transit as well. That's the main thing we deal with data in motion and at rest. right? So how many of you know, right? It is not a role-based access control or RBAC. Have you heard about it? How many of you heard about role-based access control? So before going about that, right? So role-based access control is predominantly you're giving access based on a particular role, right? So that is where you might have some other information like attribute-based access control. That is also another form of role-based access control. We have to manage. One of the main things they will tell in cloud is least privilege, right? Least privilege should be followed out there. So meaning any user should not be given any excess privileges than more than what is required. So for instance, let's say there's a teacher or a doctor. A doctor should not be given access to, let's say he's a heart surgeon, he should not be given access to a neurological patient or someone with an gastritis patients out there. That information should not be given out there unless is given access to that. Similarly, in a cloud environment, identity and access management is very much important. We have to be very careful which user we are creating and how it is that they can have access to and other things. Right? In recent times, identity access management is probably the most used attack vector. Because they do it because using the phishing mails, right? Where we can compromise a particular user because that particular user would have clicked a particular link. And a lot of times it is administrators that is doing this activity. And one of the recent major Microsoft attacks was basically because of that. They did not come up with something a zero-day vulnerability or things like that. They compromised one of the administrators who had a higher access to that resources and things like that, right? So we have to make sure that. So in those cases, least privilege is going to be there, but it is going to be cumbersome for me to every time there's a new user comes in and I have to keep on checking, okay, I have to add this and this, and that becomes a very difficult problem, right? For instance, let's say think about in a public call center, there are about 100 users, 100 telecallers are there. They will have access to the customer data, but they will not have access to update the customer data. Right? In some cases, they will be able to update the address and phone numbers, but other things they can't see or do things like that. So there's a certain set of functionalities, right? There's a certain set of functionalities, and they need to have access to those. For every 100 user, I cannot tell, okay, add this, add this, add this, and it becomes very, and let's say new user joins, I have to redo that again, and a new user, some user leaves, I have to remove all those functionalities as well. It is going to be very difficult. In order to overcome this, what they'll do is that they will set up a role, right? There's one functionality, and they'll assign all the functionality to that role. Now, when a user comes in, what I have to do is what I have to do is assign this role to that user. And by assigning that role to that user, I'm going to be giving all the access to that role. Now, if this user is leaving, I just have to remove the role for that, and that will be removed out there, right? For instance, a manager for a SFO, so San Francisco branch, will have access to that information. And when he moves to a new branch, I have to assign him a new role, and that particular branch access will be given to him for that, right? Again, have more security feature. Again, have multi-factor authentication processes here as well to make sure that you increase the probability, right? It is not difficult to compromise multi-factor authentication also, right? We do test multi-factor authentications. We have compromised multi-factor authentications, your OTP and things like that. You might have seen previously your OTP used to be 3-digit. And nowadays it is much more than 6 to 7 digits are there. There's a reason for that. We able to clearly compromise the 3-digit functionality out here. Right. So how many of you are using multi-factor authentication for your normal utilization of services? Right. What are you just using SMS via SMS codes you're doing, or you are using some other form of authenticator apps and things like that? Nowadays, the
Normally, I
security,
use
yes,
authenticated app.
for accessing your
Any
Microsoft.
any kind of whichever platform is giving two-factor authenticator, like including banking, social media, uh, for every step.
Good. That's a good option. Nowadays, companies are moving much more stringent into this. So they do not only they will have a dedicated virtual private network between the client and the cloud services. Everything is going to be encrypted. And at that time, you will need to have a multi-factor authentication, which is again monitored by your VPN service provider, right? And it is keeps on changing every constantly, and everything is going to be reported as well, right? You will have to secure your endpoints as well, right? So we are looking here from a different perspective. What are the different components that are there and things like that. Endpoints are very much important. So how do you defense in that provision is by adding more kind of services available out there. Firewalls, anti-malware, intrusion detection, and access control mechanism, DDoS protection, and things like that. If you go and check out AWS nowadays, you will see the amount of security appliances they provide. Or you take anyone, means like AWS is something which we use more common. But if you take any Azure or GCP, you will see they have much more protective services to at the provide points, right? Firewall configuration, things like that. A large organization nowadays are moving towards Azure because it is much more easier for them to manage the network access, especially for running identity access management, IAM, and the securing endpoints. Mainly because they are supporting Active Directory approach, where you're using a single sign-on approach to protect multiple things, right? In a non-traditional, in a non-other AWS or in using the GCP, it is going to be a bit more cumbersome since the platform Azure belongs to Microsoft. They have much more seamless approach to providing activities, and all of your teams. Sorry. All of your teams and other processes will be running on Azure itself, right? So it is traditionally we only use firewall. It is not sufficient. Nowadays, we'll have to add more security appliances. It could be log analytics systems and intrusion and access control and things like that. One of the main, right? One of the main things that we have seen, right? Where there is the leak, where the impact of an attack is quite high, is that when there is a lack of log or monitoring is not done properly. Cloud environment also we should need to monitor this. We should monitor all the activities of the critical users, right? It may not be possible to monitor and log all the activities, right? One of the uh, logging is a very difficult art to manage, and it becomes you have to be very careful what you are logging and what you're not logging on time. So once what happened was, example, I'll tell you, an administrator set up a log telling that any file changed in that folder should be logged in this text file. Let's say logs.txt. So this will contain that information, file name changed on by who changed that particular thing. And unfortunately, this administrator kept this file in this particular folder, and everything that is going to be changes into this is going to be there. So someone changed one of the folders, a log got generated here. So now what happened? This log.txt file also changed because a new line was added. One more log was generated telling that a new line was added and file modified. That resulted in one more log generating. It kept on going on an infinite loop till it actually filled up the hard drive and it crashed. Right, and it is very dangerous, right? And it has happened a lot of times. The mailbox is completely filled and things like that. We have to be very careful. But managing logs itself is not enough, right? Creating logs and storing log is not enough. We should also have some process of analyzing these logs out there, right? It gives you much more credibility. It helps you identify if there is an attack or if there is an attempt to an attack can be identified out there. So it gives us a much more clear. So one of the things it is going to is we can monitor the administrator access accounts. We can see if the account is compromised. We can monitor that and check why that particular account is running a certain command. Right. If you're running something with a root user, or if a command started with sudo, a log will be generated and it will create immediately an alert telling that it could identify an attack is in process. Right. You can also look into the make changes through log. So if an attacker is having access to a particular service or things like that, we can analyze the log immediately and identify there's an attack in process and they can mitigate that attack, right? Probably they can remove the attacker or they can shut down the server which is of target for that. There can a lot of things that can be done. That's going to be there as well. And one of the issues, as we told, security misconfiguration can also be identified using log files, right? A certain activity will be shown and we can understand, okay, let's say a root user is logged into the system from a remote machine and that log can be generated. Then we can identify because the remote root access should not be allowed. Anyone should log in as a user and then you have elevate the root user, but I cannot directly do an SSH root process out here. And analyzing the log is going to help you, right? It will also help out as we spoke earlier, right? User IAM management. It will also identify that users are not running with privileges that is not needed by them, right? We can see what are the actions performed by someone. We can tell this is not needed by you and it can be mitigated, right? So AWS Cloud Trail is one example services from AWS that can be used for this process, right? So where have you guys seen where the logs are generated typically in a Linux environment? Have you used your logs? Right. Logs are not predominantly used, right? In the initial stages of log creation or as an administrator or as a developer, you'll always look into logs from a troubleshooting perspective as well, right? But later it started getting used for the process. In Linux environment, you can see var folder and logs is going to be more predominantly used for that, right? Security misconfiguration is an right major problem. One of the major problems. One of the most difficult things for us to identify is also security misconfiguration. The one of as an auditing team, I'm talking about that. because we need to have access to that, and number of things that we need to check is going to be very high. And predominantly, we like to prefer using a automation tool which can reduce this difficulty, but it may not be possible all the time. What are the issues that we could face? Right? What are the issues that could be faced? I'll tell you one example. So if you have someone who used Oracle database, Oracle 8 or 7 or something like that, there's a normal user ID called Scott Tiger out there, right? Scott is the username and password is Tiger. What happened was someone, when they installed the server, they forgot to remove this user. And this user had access to many database. So they created their information in the default database. So they had created other users. They were managing it for that. But hacker was able to gain access to the network into the database and steal all the data because the configuration wise, they did not remove the older version, right? Older user that was not out there, that was there out there. In one case, what happened was the administrating team was good. They created a new database, new DB, and started putting information into that. With Scott Tiger, hacker is not able to gain access to that because they're not given any access to it, but he still had access to the database. So what he did, he created a new database and started filling the data, which actually resulted in filling the entire database and led to a DDoS attack. Right. So in similar cases, in a cloud environment, right, we see this happening. Right, we see this happening. What happens is that there may be S3 interface, storage interface, where they forgot to implement any kind of an authentication. Anyone requesting a resources from a particular S3 bucket is able to access to that, and they can pull any data out of it, or it could be where they're managed it, right? Where they're managed, they're going with the default settings out there. It is very difficult, right? We also see certain times from a configuration perspective, they might have given out the username and password in leaked out information and things like that. And that should not be done. Make sure by default it may be running in a higher privilege user that is not running in that way. And a lot of other things that we need to take care. One of the best ways to go about here is to use CIS benchmark, where CIS benchmark will have a important information. What are the default configuration that need to be checked and disabled? Or you can also go with CSA, Cloud Security Alliance, also will provide a lot of information about what are the things that need to be done perspective into that, right? So we have to make sure no default permission is never used. Also make sure that not all users have read-write access to that, right? Only that process. They should making sure the least privilege, meaning a data should only be in the view state by default. If they have to modify or delete or anything, you need to add it at a later stage. By default, it should not support that, right? You should also understand what are the setups are right or not. This is where an architect and the security guy and the development team need to sit and understand what are the different default settings that are there and we need to be closed and how do we close it. Okay, right. This is very much important. Configuring misuse is one of the major problems in an infrastructure level, right? It is configuration will also come into play. Let's say if you're using in small password, right? About 7 or 8 character long password is also a security misconfiguration. If I forget to change password once in every 30 days, that is also security misconfiguration out there. There are a lot of other things that comes into, right? If you go for a MySQL, right? MySQL, what is going to happen? The user in the root Linux is also going to be present out there. Similarly, in a cloud environment, it comes with a lot of default settings that need to be allowed, right? Previously, your cloud firewalls used to come with allow all by default, right? So we have to explicitly deny, make changes to that for that. Nowadays, the security configuration is different. Now it's going to be deny all by different, right? And the processes that are running, it should be running as what user privilege, and that is also going to make a huge difference here, right? We have seen API security configuration. What has happened is that in cloud environment, an API request will be there, right? When that request is sending to the cloud server, it is sending a username and password. What we did in one of the cases was that we removed the username and password and send it, and we still got the output, right? This was because the S3 was your AWS was not configured to cross-check the username and password that was sent on there, right? It was just randomly sending the request and it was not verifying. This had happened because the developer was running an issue and every time it was checking username and password, it was delaying it. In order to, for that particular process, he's removed that process to make his debugging much more faster, but he forgot to re-enable it, right? So that led to a compromise of that. Right? Luckily, nothing happened, right? And one of the things that is very important and one of the final things that need to do on an everyday basis is what we have been doing all the time, right? Auditing, auditing. Continue to audit, right? Either you can use an external auditor or an in-house auditor who is going to look at your infrastructure and look from a different perspective. Is it possible to break? What are the security features? Are they everything is being implemented or things like that? And they will try to do this. Penetration testing and vulnerability scanning, as we have spoken already. We like to scan the network, what are the services they are running, and check where is there any vulnerabilities. And in pen testing, we'll take the same information and we'll try to exploit. Yeah. So, but it is also important to regularly do security audits, assess all security and controls to determine their capabilities, make sure you follow about security terms and standards. Security audits on a periodical base is very important. One thing is that it will always make sure your compliance is in place. If you lose compliance because you will not be able to, there are certain projects. If it is that second it loses the compliance, they have to stop the service. Right? Without that compliance, they can't continue. For instance, for PCI DSS data compliance, if your data does not meet, you have to immediately stop online transactions on your web application. And security audit on periodical level, it will give me access into this information. Where is my compliance status? Is it up to date or some issue is there and review that? Not only that, in a cloud environment, you're always dependent on someone else. The control is not with you all the way. There are a lot of third-party tools that are there. We can also check their thing is that are they up to the mark? And we continue to use them and the process like this with that. Again, one more thing is data control, data security measures has to be taken care, constantly monitor, and those things is again part of it. You might have talking about an audit log analytics quite often in multiple places, right? Because it is a solution for multiple vulnerabilities or multiple security threats. Right? The one of the newer ones that we are seeing nowadays is security as a service. Right? So this is purely Main advantage is that you're providing VPN service, you're providing firewall service on cloud, you're providing WAF service, and a lot of other things. One example I can talk about in real time was there's a company called Barracuda, and they provide DDoS protection. Right? If you have to do, all they had to do was to set up that, subscribe to that particular service, Barracuda DDoS protection, and set up their IP address for the server which they need to protect DOS service. That's it, nothing else. And when we did the attack for the first time, there was a security misconfiguration on the Barracuda side, and the attack was successful, and the configuration server, the main server, was compromised. But they went back and they saw that the configuration issue is there. And the next time we did a lot of attacks, much more deeper. A complete day was spent sending millions and millions of packets. Nothing went through that, right? Think if you're having an on-prem service, what would be your cost? Or from a training perspective, from a personal perspective, from an purchasing the product perspective, what the cost is going to be as compared to a cloud service, security service, right? Here, only thing I have to do is that I put up an IP address. I'll tell I want to protect this, and the rest, everything was taken care by the service provider. Whereas in a real time, that is not going to be that easy, right? It's going to be much more complex into that. So it is increasing. So one of the reasons why people are sticking around cloud is that they don't have to worry about security. The cloud itself is providing the security. Any kind of breach or anything, it is much more easier to manage, right? That is that. By default, AWS provides some kind of a security, but if you want an advanced level, you always have to upgrade yourself for that. But it is a very good thing to go with that because it is much more streamlined, much more seamless because it's an AWS infrastructure. They understand how to make it much more easier to implement. If you go with some third party, it may not be always easy to implement. It could lead to some issues as well, right? Main advantages, it's going to cost saving, right? Second thing is that you will have access to the experts. If you're doing on-prem or doing on your own, what is going to happen is that you will have to hire an expert. Getting a security expert is a very difficult issue. And again, maintaining them and salary that is going to be on a higher end, right? You will don't have to worry about what are the latest security tools, are they up to date or anything like that. Your vendor is going to take care of that. Faster provision, right? Some kind of in an DDoS attack, when that happened, we pushed a lot of data. The cloud provider, the security provider, Barracuda, was able to scale up for that particular span of time, and it made sure nothing, not even single packet, single malicious packet went to the server. But it was able to manage this such a large attack because it was automatically able to scale its protection devices in the cloud environment. But if it was a normal customer, scaling that provisions would have been difficult for them, right? So that is a process, and it is much more easier to manage when services are taken care, services, security as a service is taken care by the organization rather than they themselves managing everything. It's not difficult. There are a lot of in a cloud environment, there are a lot of free tools available out there which can do this in the same way, but the cost there is going to be the time and the accuracy of it, right? When you're giving it to a service, security as a service to the experts, they understand what is needed and they will do that. But if you're doing on your own, that's going to be a huge process, right? Cloud security and cloud computing is a very vast subject. So we, in this situation, in this webinar, we have seen what are the critical ones that are present today and how do we approach those things we have seen here, right? There's more to do. And one of the best places to look for resources is Cloud Security Alliance. And you can also go with AWS security documentation. and or any cloud provider security documentation where it will help you out. How do you manage the services in a much more granular level? Yeah. That brings an end to the current webinar for cloud security, right? Thank you. Any questions? Any questions, guys? So what any topic what we spoke about today?
No, Karthik, Devashish here.
Yes. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, Karthik, one question is, as a job seeker, okay, on a security, as a security role, with a security role, where do I fit in if every of the security facets are taken over by the cloud providers? Am I going to seek a job with the cloud providers, or
Yes.
are there?
Yes, both ways, right? Cloud providers are actively looking for candidates who can help them, right? AWS and all GCPs. One of the teams they are not firing. Recently, there was a large, a lot of employees in Google India were let go. But the one of my students was working in a security team, and their team was intact. Nothing was changed, and I think probably their senior most manager was let go, but rest of the team was there because they needed those people to implement security. Not only that, even though you get the appliance or the security components from a third party, there is some kind of a management that needs to happen, right? From the user side as well. So what I mean to say here is that if you see here, this is true for other places as well, right? So SaaS and things like that, you could see there's a cloud provider providing it, and but there's a customer also needs to be involved in that. What is the security and things like that, and especially if you might see in a cloud infrastructure, the openings are predominantly is for IAM, identity access management engineers are required more often out there. So that is one of the openings out there. And again, when it comes to firewall and the IDPS machines and again VPNs, that will still need users to be done. Setting up this infrastructure is going to be difficult, but managing them, we should also be done by that, right? Either that person is in the cloud provider or is working on the client basing, but that person for managing is needed for sure, right? So that is why, especially we are seeing this countries where security considerations are increasing significantly, right? When you're seeing Saudi Arabia, the kingdom, the openings there for cybersecurity is exploding out there. The main reason is the country all of a sudden decided that there is no data going out of the country. Everything has to be inside, right? So it is not mandatory that right you will only be working for cloud providers. You will also be working for clients as well who are using the services.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you.
Right. Any more questions? Right?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, then. So then we can wrap up the session for today. And our cybersecurity 6 week sessions going to start from the next Friday, and that will be evening batch for US and Canadian students, morning batch for Indian students, African and European students they are more preferable time is our US morning batch. That batch is going to start in June. So if you are based out of Africa and EU, then you should wait for that. But those students are based in America and Canada, US or Mexico, they should join this evening batch because this time is for align with their evening time. So this is the end of our cybersecurity today's session, as well as cybersecurity's internship program. Those who have already joined and uh, at least 2 or 3 batches session, and feel free to ping me or ping us in the group. If you the certificate will take another 4 or 5 days to show up in your profile page. So from there you can download your certificate. From next weekend we don't will I don't think we'll have this cybersecurity internship, and we'll restart the cybersecurity internship with some new topics, maybe after 1 week or 2 week later. But next weekend our internship and new 2 batch is going to start. One is DevOps, another is AI, because AI's job opening is day by day increasing exponentially. So, and we do have a very uh, efficient and expert in as a and trainer in that particular domain. So we do have a separate course as well on that. And our DevOps classes evening batches was started last Friday, no, the last Thursday. So 2 session is already running. So the next evening batch is going to start for DevOps after 1.5 months. And again, I'm repeating, cybersecurity's batch is going to start in the next Friday. And if you miss this boat, you need to have to wait for another 1.5 months for next batch, which is evening US and Canadian time. So that's it. So for now, and ping us and try to
We have to
introduce.
register for the
Yeah, Jared, I cannot hear you very
we
properly.
have to register for cybersecurity course.
Yes,
We have
because
to register for cybersecurity course.
yes, you have to register for that one, because that is a totally different ball game, and as that is a paid one, and that is a Monday to Friday every day 2 hours, and that is like 80% hands-on. You'll have a separate lab, practice, virtual machine, everything, live projects, captions projects. So that will make you actual cybersecurity expert or job ready for that particular domain. And internship is our free courses, and that will give you a awareness as well as high level overview of any of our or trendy job positions, right? So if you are willing to participate our cybersecurity one, feel free to register. If you face any issue, ping us, we will assist you on that. Or if you have any question. Okay, any more question from you or any of you?
No, not okay, Sunday.
Your voice is